going. Our next speaker is Kieran Long. Kieran is Senior Curator of Contemporary Architecture, Design, and Digital at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Prior to this, he had a long career as a critic, writer, and editor at various publications, including London's newspaper, The Evening Standard. So we'll get your presentation and then come on up. Oh, bear with us one more moment. Okay.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for coming to listen to us. And I should say thanks first to Lars and to Pauline and all the M+ crew who have been really fantastic in making this happen. I'm quite new to being a curator, so this kind of whole scene of curatorial conversation and discussion is also new to me. And I don't know how well I fit in yet, but everyone was very kind. And so relaxed did I get that I said all sorts of things that were really rude about people outside the room and about my colleagues at the V&A, which I really hope M+ keeps secret, and I'm going to do my best this evening to not repeat any of those ill-advised comments and to be very proper for this public audience. But as I say, I also have learned a great deal over the last couple of days. I could listen to Ken's interpretation of that Warhol piece over and over again. For me, despite you, Ken, it has the ring of truth about it. It feels right to me, and there's been lots of moments of that kind of recognition. But my curatorial task is quite different to some of the other speakers this evening, because the Victoria and Albert Museum in London is a design museum, principally, a museum of design and art, but our art collection stops at 1945. Our collection of paintings and sculpture stops after the Second World War. We no longer collect contemporary art. And the main areas of collecting for the museum are design. We have over 700 people working at the museum. We have over 200 curators and over 30 curators actively involved in collecting contemporary things for the collection, adding to the collection. This collection already has 2.5 million things in it, which puts us in quite a different situation to M+, who's beginning a collection. We've got massive amounts of stuff, a whole building out in West London that you can visit with more paintings in it than the National Gallery and more drawings than any other architectural drawing collection in the world. It's an overwhelming amount of stuff. And I suppose what I've been trying to figure out since January when I joined the museum is, how do you add to that? You know, how do you collect contemporary design, things of the 21st century that might make sense against this extraordinary background? And in some ways, working at a museum like the V&A doesn't give you lots of clues where to start, because there are as many different approaches to curating things, collecting things, as there are curators. We have a collections policy. It's like this thick, and justifies most decisions. It's really down to individual connoisseurship and individual expertise and the expertise of the individual curator and their interests. And as a journalist, I found that quite difficult to handle when I arrived, and wanted to come up with a different logic, another logic for collecting contemporary design that might not just be about individual taste, with all of the connotations that brings, not be about judgments to do with aesthetics. You know, my sort of greater expertise than yours allows me to make judgments on your behalf. I wanted to try and take that away and think, what other ways might we think about objects in the world today and how we collect them? And I'm just going to talk about one part of that today. There are lots of activities that we're engaged with in our new section, our new contemporary section within the V&A, which I run. Our new section, I should say, covers 3 fields: architecture and urbanism, design, product design. We call it design that's everything but not furniture, because there are other people doing furniture. So it's kind of, you know, product design in its broadest sense. And digital design. Digital design is not digital art, so it's everything that is kind of functional, somehow digital design, which is a massive amount. The whole of the internet, you know, is one part of digital design. You know, these are vast fields, and one has to come up with a way of slicing them, with a way of kind of coming up with a logic that unites these three fields and unites contemporary practice, but also kind of gives us a momentum. And so one of our ways we've decided to tackle this is through a new collecting policy that's been approved by the V&A, which we call rapid response collecting. She's showing these great signs. These are just as I mentioned rapid response collecting, I want to go and rapidly collect these amazing signs that she holds up to tell me how many minutes are left. You've got 10 more of me, by the way, she just showed me. Rapid response collecting. This is an idea that you should collect works of design in response to major events in the world, major global events. Something happens that bears on material culture, that bears on design and manufacturing, and you go out the next day and buy that thing and show it in the museum the day after that. What would be the possible outcomes of behaving that way? What's the difference? Thinking about a news story, something you read in the newspaper, if the day after you could go to M+, or you could go to the V&A and stand next to that very thing, even handle that thing, how does it change your relationship with an event to experience the material culture of it firsthand? And this image behind me is the first object or group of objects that we acquired for the museum, our new team, my first acquisition for the museum, and was the first one that kind of responded in this way. It wasn't as fast as we would have liked, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But it was an attempt to say, something has just happened in the world of design. We need to respond to it really fast, get it in the museum so the conversation can be in our building. These are all, let me find a better image here. They are all components of a gun. A 3D printed gun. These are all the components. It's 15 components. You can download the drawings to this gun. They're Rhino files. You can print them out on a fairly heavy-duty 3D printer, put them together with one metal component, which is the small nail, and then fire a for-real bullet into somebody else's body with it, if you wanted to. It's quite an extraordinary piece of industrial design. But this object emerged in March this year. Some of you may have seen it. There was a lot of press around it. And it was designed by a guy called Cody Wilson. He's a Texan. He's from Texas. People from Texas, they love guns. They're constantly kind of, thinking about better ways to create machines that can kill other people. And Cody certainly did that. But his motivations for this were absolutely political. He's not of his nature, I don't think, a particularly violent man. But he believes, on principle, he's an anarchist, he believes that you and I should have the same access to firearms that the army does, or that the police does. And the fact that we don't, the fact that the law says that we are not allowed that access, is limiting our freedom and is unfair. And his decision was that through design and through modern methods of manufacturing, he would tackle this political imbalance, this imbalance in our freedoms, in a very direct way, as a piece of direct action. And what he did was design the first functioning 3D printed gun and released the plans online, open source, to everyone in the world, potentially, through his organization called Defense Distributed. You can have a look at his website. The website of Defense Distributed still has some of these drawings on them. In the first 3 days that these drawings were released, over 100,000 people around the world downloaded them. Nobody knows where those people are. Nobody knows if they went on to print out these things or not. Actually, there's a big scene in improving his designs and altering them, changing them. There are now 3D printable guns that you can 3D print in metal. There are rifles in 3D printable plastic. But this was the first one. This was the very first one. And by any standards, it's kind of an amazing piece of industrial design. This is high-density nylon it prints in. And the idea that you could make springs strong enough to fire a firing pin into a bullet out of this high-density nylon is quite amazing. It took a lot of experimentation, a lot of thinking for him to be able to achieve this, and many people said it was impossible. And in fact, this gun, because of the tolerance of the material, has a limited life. You can fire kind of 4 or 5 bullets out of this, and then it starts to fall to pieces. So he's very much working at the limits of the technical possibilities of this technique. But for him, he doesn't really care about any of that. All of my interest in his industrial design brilliance, and my interest in the implications of distributed manufacturing, of the idea that you might have a 3D printer in your home and be able to print this out and I wouldn't know. He's not really interested in that. For him, this is pure politics. When we acquired this for the museum, it started a whole series of other debates that were really, really interesting. So one of the things was, how do we collect this? You know, how does a museum collect a project that's been allowed to, you know, be free? It's open source. You know, the idea of this is that you download it wherever you are, print it out, and use it. And the V&A doesn't really collect like this. Museums like the Victoria and Albert Museum are terribly interested in the original author. So we collected this in a very V&A way. We went to Texas, my colleague went to Texas and met Cody, and tried to collect the earliest possible prototypes of this gun. We said, Cody, we want the hand of the maker on this. So in the end, we are acquiring 3 separate versions of the gun, all of which were printed out on his machine. One he put together and fired himself. So we have a version of the gun that he actually fired. We have a gun that's been put together but hasn't been fired, and then we have a gun that's in its component parts and hasn't been assembled. This is a very V&A way of collecting. Anyway, the V&A also has a collection of weapons, so we have all the relevant licenses to import a gun and to display a gun. No problem with that. But it proved to be a problem to get the export license for Cody Wilson to send us these guns. Cody Wilson is a licensed gun manufacturer, but he's not a licensed gun exporter. And so he had to get an export license. And we had to get an import license for the first ever import of a 3D printed gun. There's never been a 3D printed gun imported in any context into the UK before. Anyway, to cut a very long and bureaucratic story short, we missed our deadline. We were supposed to show this in September, and we missed the deadline for that. They were still the pieces from Cody's workshop were sat in a packing warehouse at JFK Airport when our exhibition opened. So what did we do? Well, we printed one ourselves, which is probably what we should have done in the first place, right? We went to a 3D printing bureau in London called Digits to Widgets. This is their logo, D2W, and there are all the pieces inside this 3D printed box. This is how it comes, fresh out of the 3D printer. And Digits to Widgets said to us, yeah, okay, we'll print this for you. We're fine. We're happy about that. But we've got some kind of moral qualms about this gun. We don't like the idea that we might produce something for you that could be used to kill someone. So we'll print 13 of the components in high-density nylon, but 2 of the components we'll print in plaster, so that if you did try and put this thing together and fire it, it would actually either explode in your hand or just not work. I thought this was a very interesting moment. This is a 3D printing bureau, small bureau in East London, self-regulating the production of arms in the UK. There's no legal framework for their activity. They had no law to look at. We couldn't direct them to the appropriate guidance. So they kind of regulated it themselves. This felt very unstable and very, very interesting. Anyway, this 13 parts nylon and 2 parts plaster piece went on display in the museum in September and was on display there for a month. Since then, we've got the relevant import licenses and the real things are coming from Cody. Tonight, I'm only really going to talk about this one object because I think it's more or less all I've got time to talk about. But it just hopefully unlocks some of the issues that we've been discussing over the last couple of days and some of the issues that M+ curators will have to tackle and we're trying to tackle about new manufacturing technologies, about the digital world and what an authentic object might be in that world. And also the fact that some of the most important turning points in design in particular today are objects that are unlikely to be very beautiful, although I think this gun has a certain terrible beauty. They may be objects that threaten us, that suggest or lead back to political motivations that we're not sympathetic with. And we have to decide where we stand on that. What's a design museum for today? The V&A was set up in 1851 to improve British design. Now, by buying this gun, am I hoping that British gun manufacturers will become more innovative? No, probably not. But I do think this is a signpost to where this technology is going. And I hope to collaborate with M+ and Arik and his team on how people like us tackle this kind of topic in the future. So I think I'll just leave you with that one object and stop there and look forward to the discussion. But thanks for having me.